Actually very strange being up here seeing everyone, particularly as I'm aware this is kind of a dry title. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I also need to pick up my clicker, otherwise this is going to go very badly. So I'm going to be talking about vertical farming a little bit. I'm going to be talking about industrial IoT a little bit. But actually, to set the scene on this, a lot of what we're talking about is universal observability problems. We have specific challenges when we're dealing with industrial IoT. It's just the nature of the business. But those challenges are more around the protocols which are being used. They're more around some of the outages which we can uncover. The observability challenges, they're pretty universal. So hopefully everyone will get something from this, because I know not many people will be working in the industrial space. Quick introduction to me, that's my face, in case you can't see it here. Same eyeliner, same hair, not much has changed. Owen Bower Adams, Head of Platform Engineering at IGS, but because I've been at IGS since quite an early employee, my role covers quite a bit. So there is the SRE team, there's the SDEP function, there's some software engineers who report into me. I also oversee some IS stuff, some procurement, a whole range of things. And I think anyone who's worked in kind of startup, scale-up culture will be able to appreciate that. You end up with a lot of hats. So 20 plus years of experience, that's a grandiose way of saying I've got 21 years of experience, but I liked the way that sounded a bit more. And yeah, the observability side of things is something I've been on a journey with IGS for a while now. Quick introduction to the company. So Intelligent Growth Solutions, I will consistently call it IGS because it's a bit of a mouthful. We are in the vertical farming business, but specifically, we are an infrastructure provider. So we don't really grow crops outside of research and development, which we engage with our customers. We instead have this modular factory system which we build and deploy for customers. Some customers have 4 towers. We're also working on customers which have 200 plus towers. And these towers are 9 to 12 meters tall. Each one of those will have 50, 60, 70 snooker-sized table trays in them. So this is the industrial scale side of growing crops in this kind of environment. We're not talking about things on like in a kitchen, which we see some of the customers do. That gives us some really interesting challenges as well, which I'll come on to in a little bit. There's a quick little bit more about IGS here. So this is, we have customers, we have grown, we have scaled out to various locations. We have a very, very busy year ahead. But this is something which works. This is a model which we are actually deploying successfully, and one where we do have customer outages, which I think is a really important thing to stress. I wanted to quickly talk about the engineering teams. So one of the things which makes working in this space a little bit different is the number of people which I work with who have an engineering background but haven't ever really dealt with software before. We've got the platform engineering side, as I mentioned, and underneath software in general, there's IoT, which sits on the bridge between everything. There's the user apps team, which is our kind of customer-facing products team. You have data. But then outside of that, we have people working in R&D. You have HVAC engineers. You have deployment engineers who are actually the people who go out to customer sites and build this and commission it and get it online. And then we also have engineering adjacent teams like customer support, who some of them might come from a field engineering background, which is doing things on site. Some of them might come from more of a software background. And a really important thing I'm hoping to talk about during this is how having a shared language has really been valuable for us as we've begun to roll out Grafana Cloud across the organization. I'm going to take a moment to talk about the tooling. I'm going to talk about our architecture and then where we've been on the journey with observability. And then after that, we're going to go through a handful of use cases where I can talk about how this has kind of empowered us. So our architecture, and this is significant in my view, kind of covers the end-to-end. So we have the physical site itself, and this is the HVACs, the irrigation system, the lighting, all the way up to the PLC, and that's Programmable Logic Controller, if I remember the acronym correctly. We also have edge devices which handle like Wi-Fi access and pulling in various bits of sensor data. So we have the physical site, but then we also have a SaaS product. And that SaaS product is where customers will log in to define how they want to grow crops. So they'll control their lighting cycles, they'll manage users, they will view telemetry, go and peek at photos of crops growing. And that's a large part of what we offer, and that is the end-to-end. And when we talk about observability in IGS, we are talking about pretty much everything there, primarily down to the PLCs, but the PLCs are just exposing data coming from the actual sensors which are instrumented throughout the environment. So this is large telemetry problems. When we're talking about 200 towers for a single site, that is 16,000-ish trays, all of that sensor data coming through, all of those lift moves. So this is our kind of architecture, and I've included a diagram on the next page, which I'm hoping no one can read, otherwise I'm going to get into trouble. However, while that is a little bit complex, I actually had a new hire recently create this for me, which was, I think, his worst form of punishment that he could have imagined. But it's a microservice architecture. We have the end user kind of side on the right and the field engineers. We have people coming from the front end. All of that in the middle is largely just microservices. We have stateless applications running on Kubernetes. We have state running in databases. These are not new observability problems. Some of the data we pull in is new, but again, as complex as that is, it's probably something which looks similar to most of the people in this room. In fact, it's probably nowhere near as complex as some of the people in the room. And that's something I really want to stress when we start talking about how we've adopted Grafana Cloud and what we're kind of getting out of it. So our observability journey to date, we started out on Azure App Insights when I joined. I think that was largely just because of the fact it was there. I think a few people have probably ended up using whatever the cloud provider was offering when they start with that. We then had a brief stint with Grafana open source, and I love Grafana open source. I've got a lot of experience with it, but the reality is at that point in our journey, we had a very small team. We still have a relatively small team, and I had to make a decision on do we build or do we buy? And we went with buy because when you've got a small team, kind of aligning them to things which are delivering value to the business is incredibly important, and having them deal with the complexities of managing scaling Prometheus for large amounts of telemetry data isn't something which I could justify investing their time in. So we went to New Relic for a bit. I'm not going to badmouth New Relic, like we had good experiences with it, but what we were finding was as we were scaling and as we had certain challenges we were facing, it wasn't the right platform for us. So about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, started doing an evaluation of alternatives, and we've ended up on Grafana Cloud. And I will say today, we are 100% on Grafana Cloud. We don't have any lingering New Relic or any other observability tools in place. We are fully on it, and we use most of it, which I think I'm touching on shortly. I mentioned there's certain challenges. This isn't a migration story. There was a great migration talk earlier from Andy. Highly recommend going and having a listen to that. This isn't a migration story, but I do want to set some context of where we were to where we are now. As I mentioned, our customer base is scaling significantly over the next year. And that kind of scale is not B2C, where we're talking about large volume of new users. We're talking about much more complex sites, and they come with a whole host of knock-on effects. It impacts customer support, it impacts deployment. Onboarding new towers is so much more complex when you're delivering 20 per month compared to a couple in a 6-month period. So that scale brings with it a lot of problems which we need to address. We also face quite unique high impact from downtime. Now, everyone in this room, if you have an outage, it's a significant problem. Ours is not worse, but it is slightly different. If we say 200 towers, props are pretty resilient because it turns out Mother Nature is not the most consistent of things out there. However, you can impact yield, you can impact crop growth, and consistency is very key for our customers, so we need to be able to respond to outages quickly. Also, when you have a factory floor, if you have an outage where you've got people moving trays back and forth across the floor, if that goes on for several hours, you can back up operations for weeks. You can delay crop harvests going out as they need to reschedule things. So outages are quite high impact and have quite a high human cost for us when that happens. And there's a couple of bits on here which I'm not going to go into too much, but we have various data silos which were in place. We have a lot of moving parts. And while we had a lot of tooling, none of it was really integrated, because while we had an observability solution, we didn't really have the wider range of access to these tools and bring it all into one place, and the integrations which we were seeking. Small team, we also didn't have the time to address that. This is a very quick slide. Instrumentation and metrics. None of this will be strange to anyone here, other than maybe OPC UA, which is an industrial control protocol which we use. This is what our stack looks like. We're using OTel, we're using logs, we have SNMP for networking, we've got cloud integrations. All of this stuff is pretty standard. And that's, again, important. We want something which makes it easy for us to hire as well. We don't want people to be scared off by the fact we're doing industrial control. And this is where we are now that we've actually gone onto Grafana Cloud, and the reasons for going on to Grafana Cloud was we looked at this and we're kind of like, okay, there's a whole range of tools we can use here. This is a whole ecosystem we can use. And we make use of pretty much every part of it, not quite, but I'm pretty sure we will be soon. And this has been a year and a bit worth of adoption. And a lot of this, like K6, was tools we were already using. So that's where we're at today, and this is going beyond the metrics for us into the whole ecosystem. So, this is the bulk of the talk. I'm going to be going through 3 use cases and examples of where we found this delivers value. I'm hoping people will find something interesting in this. And a lot of this is where we've gone beyond just simple metrics into other parts of the stack and where that's paid off. First thing, customer alerting. Alerting is hard. It's also really, really hard when you're trying to customize alerts for customers, which is something we have to do. Some of our bigger customers will integrate directly with the factory floor. However, for the vast majority of our customers to date, they want the ability to know if temperature has gone outside of a threshold which they want to set. There's entire companies whose whole job is dealing with alerting. So we didn't want to try and reinvent the wheel because that's a lot of time which we would lose. So we had the challenge of needing to bring in alerting. And while we had a solution already, it was difficult to manage. It was very manual. We had to do a lot of kind of kludgy onboarding when we were starting up with a new customer. And we wanted to have clear ownership for customer support to be able to manage this going forward, and we wanted more granular notification policies. So the way we solved this, and this is a quick screenshot from the UI. So we actually use Grafana for the alerting part for our customers. We have Azure Data Explorer, and we're using the enterprise plugins to just query that directly. We then have customer support create new alerts, but we have a baseline of alerts we've done for infrastructure as code. And then we feed that back into the system through Service Bus. So we just use a endpoint and we send an HTTP request with a message payload in there, and then that flows back into the system. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is the end result is actually pretty cool for us. We have alerting, which is using the same source of data which is being seen by the customers in the UI for their telemetry. We haven't exposed any personal information into Grafana for like mobile phones, for example, because that's all in our system. It just feeds back into it. But the big thing is this is now fully owned by customer support, who haven't necessarily used these kind of toolings before. We've trained them up in a bit of Custo, we've shown them UI, and I'm now finding use cases for this which I didn't know existed. So the other day I found out that they've created an integration with Power BI, which they're using to do some stuff in Jira Service Management. Empowering them and giving that tooling enabled them to solve problems which never came across a software engineering desk. Rightly or wrongly, but I'm still glad that they did it. The next thing I want to talk about is testing for scale. So I mentioned earlier that we are growing in complexity. And that's a great problem to have. Like, I'm really glad we do. And we had a lot of bits and pieces for addressing this, but with larger customers coming online, we did have a simulator. We did have K6 in place. We did have Testkube in place. But we knew we had gaps in our system which wouldn't scale, because we're not just talking about number of trays, we're talking about the event handling loop, the scheduling control logic, various bits across the databases. There's a whole host of things here which have to go right for us to be able to execute jobs at a large scale, including Wi-Fi. Like, Wi-Fi contention is an issue which we face. So we had these challenges, and we had a reasonably short time frame to begin looking to address them. And the way we've approached this, again, very similar to the previous challenge. We looked to the community. One of the advantages we found of being on Grafana Cloud is there is such a wide community out there, and I think that's true regardless if it's open source or if it's on the hosted version. There's a huge community out there. Testkube, which is just really a test runner for Kubernetes with some additional bells and whistles, has OTel support, integrates with Grafana Cloud really well. We have cloud events coming out there which we've been able to translate into it. So we were able to start importing those test results into Grafana Cloud. K6. We can now use Grafana Cloud as our K6 runner, which actually helps, because one of the questions with some of our testing is, well, is it that the testing is causing any performance impact because we're running it from the same place as we're actually running the system? There's a whole bunch of things there we've been able to bypass. And because we've got this end-to-end instrumentation from the simulator through to the front-end code, through to everything in between, when we are running into performance bottlenecks, we can actually find that pretty quickly. We can go and have a look and get a single dashboard on, is it the database is facing contention because we need to up it under this scenario? And for this kind of testing, where it's not load testing on steady state, but it's load testing on where we expect to be in a year's time, which is significantly different, being able to do that kind of exploration and quickly identify where there might be problems in the stack has been a really big deal for us. And now, this same process has gone beyond using it for the scaling test. We have progressive delivery. We make use of Flux and canaries. And part of that is an integration with Grafana to check the metrics feed. We now have the load testing for some of our services. We run that as part of a quick 15-minute window. When we bring something up, we check that it's not just going to match the scale we have today, but the features we're releasing will match the scale we're going to have in a year's time. Again, just worked. We were able, there was a plugin there for what we were using for Flux. It can integrate with a Prometheus data source. We could wire it up in a few minutes. This was not a big thing to get done. And I forgot to go to the end result slide. That's on me. This is basically everything I just talked about, but with a prettier graph. So I'll move on to the next one, but essentially end result, incredibly successful. Final bit, which I know someone was talking about earlier, intermittent connection drops. Intermittent connection drops are a nightmare. They become quite complex in any scenario when you have industrial protocols, when you have physical PLCs and VPNs in the way, and also Istio and all of this kind of good stuff. They become very complex to diagnose. And we've had a persistent one for a while now, which was happening on some of our quite significant customers where it would just hang and wouldn't reconnect. We've been able to solve that problem. And actually what was really cool with solving this problem was seeing how many people could collaborate on it. So because we've got this full stack observability, because we've got this ability to run testing, we were able to create custom tools and custom tests really quickly and feed them into the overall dashboards. Some of this was eBPF, which was one of the few times I've been allowed to write code in the last 6 months because I'm too busy in meetings, simulating black holes and having that forwarded on into Grafana Cloud. We were also able to quickly implement an interim solution, which would just restart the service. We had the alerting there. We'd done that alerting earlier with the customer alerting. We could see if the telemetry feed wasn't coming through and use that to kick off restarts of part of the system while we were doing further investigation. What was really interesting is because of the data we had there in the exploration, we also found some additional risks we needed to deal with. So we discovered that there was some memory leaks under certain situations, which if we addressed this thing which was causing it to hang, we then discovered there was a whole bunch of memory leaks which we faced due to the way the underlying industrial protocol wasn't releasing certain parts of the stack. But the coolest bit for me with this was I was away when this issue started being looked into. I came back. I had people across the business creating these little micro dashboards of just 2 panels. I had people in the more control side going, hey, there's this variable name which we use you might want to look at. They are able to go create a panel and share that with a bunch of other people from customer support, from software engineering. Everyone was speaking the same language. And as a result of everyone speaking that language, we were able to get to the bottom of this much quicker. There wasn't any need to translate between different teams and the different toolings they would use. Everyone was under the same banner. Because one of the significant things we've done with Grafana Cloud is every single person in IGS can log into Grafana Cloud. Because we have monthly active users, we're not actually too stressed about that. So people just get together and work on things. So a few other areas of success I'm going to quickly touch on. So cost management. We make heavy use of adaptive telemetry and adaptive logs across the board. Like we've seen that drive our costs significantly down, which is a big thing when it comes to our customers. They measure their success on their profit margins on crop sale. The more we can drive down our OPEX, the better we can do on that. We've run some hackathons, which have been really successful. I found out about this the other day when I was preparing for this talk, and I looked into the dashboards and saw a bunch of ones I didn't know about because they've been created as part of a hackathon between different parts of the business. That's awesome to see. And we have more future confidence, which I'm going to talk about in the last kind of slide or two before questions. So what we've learned and what's next. There's a whole bunch of things on here about what we've learned. But I think there's a couple of things I hope people can take away from this. One, if you give people access to the tools and you have the data there, they will come up with use cases you didn't imagine, be it like the Power BI integration I mentioned, or the kind of dashboards I've been seeing, or just across the board, some of the stuff my SDETs are doing is phenomenal. So you can give them access and the data's there, they will do things which you don't expect, and that can be really cool. And I love seeing that. The other big thing I'd say is we have future confidence for the projects we've got coming up over the next year or two. I didn't know about a lot of these problems a year ago. I'm not going to know about problems which are coming up a year from now. The fact there is that big community around Grafana, the fact that we have great relationships with our account manager and professional services from Grafana. If we decide we want to move more of our control system from being on the cloud to being local, I know I can use Alloy for that. I know I can reach out and like solve that problem. I don't have to be stressed about how much work is that going to be for the SRE team to counter that. We can just pick it up and run with it. So having this kind of tooling, give access to as many people as you can, embrace these tiny little dashboards, don't stress about them, let people have this shared language. And for us, doing all of this and having that future confidence is a really big lesson we've learned, because I'm now more confident to take on projects for the team, and that is helping the business. This is probably largely irrelevant after seeing the stuff about Assistant this morning. Just putting it out there, like very excited about what's coming up with that. However, for us, one thing to take away from this is we're not talking about revolutionary changes, we're talking about incremental changes. We want to make more use of IRM, we want to make more use of SIFT, and we want to have niche protocols instrumented. But actually, these are incremental changes. They're not initiatives I need to run. These are feature tickets I can ask someone to go and have a look at, and that's a really big place to be at. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, observability, industrial IT is still evolving, but it doesn't look that different to what anyone else is doing. And I think that's a really important thing for people who are in that space, is to not be too concerned about it and just try and use these open standards, these open tools, and you'll get there. We've been through it. So yeah, that's kind of that. And there's questions as well, maybe, hopefully. Otherwise, it's going to be awkward.
Very good, very good.